My name is Nora Whitman. I was 34 years old when HR told me my resignation wouldn't matter. I hadn't been written up, warned, or put on a performance plan. Not once in 8 years. I paid my bills on time, showed up early, left late, and fixed problems people didn't even know existed. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't loud. I wasn't reckless with my career. I stayed because I believed loyalty still meant something, and because I thought competence spoke for itself. So when I handed in my resignation, I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. And when they dismissed me like I was replaceable, I didn't argue. I just listened. Because by then, I already knew something they didn't. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. The HR office at Callaway Group smelled like old coffee and cheap carpet. I sat across from Brenda Cole, head of people operations, and slid my resignation letter toward her with both hands. She picked it up, skimmed it for about 10 seconds, then placed it back down without a word. She folded her hands, tilted her head to one side, and said, "Nora, honestly, your resignation won't really matter." She didn't say it cruelly. That was the worst part. She said it the way someone might mention the weather. Flat, bored, already done with the conversation. I smiled. I nodded once. And somewhere deep inside me, something went completely still. Not broken. Not angry. Just quiet. Like the moment before a storm decides to move. As I walked out of that office, one thought settled in my chest like a stone. She had absolutely no idea what I did every single day. I didn't always know how to stay quiet. When I first joined Callaway Group 8 years earlier, I spoke up freely. I flagged problems. I offered ideas without being asked. But I noticed something quickly. The people who talked loudest got promoted. The people who fixed things got buried under more work instead. So I adjusted. I learned to smile and say, "No problem," even when a very large problem sat right in front of me. I learned to solve issues before they reached management, because that was the only way to keep things moving. Over time, being easy to work with became my entire identity at that company. I stopped raising my hand. I stopped putting my name on things. Slowly, without realizing how far it had gone, I became invisible inside that building. I told myself that was fine. Then I remembered the first time I covered a mistake that was never mine. That first covered mistake belonged to Marcus Webb, my department manager at the time. He had submitted wrong vendor data to the finance team, and by the time anyone noticed, an entire payment cycle was already broken. I fixed it quietly over one long weekend, rerouted the data, and sent a correction memo under a shared team signature. Nobody found out it was me. Marcus received a personal thank you from the director on Monday morning. I got nothing and hadn't expected anything. But that weekend changed something inside me. It showed me how the company truly ran, not through titles or org charts, but through invisible threads. Somehow, across the years that followed, I had become the person holding most of those threads together. I patched gaps between departments. I translated chaos into calm. I caught problems before leadership ever smelled smoke. None of it was in my job description. And nobody else knew how any of it worked. The rail wound came in year 4. I spent 3 weeks building a new client onboarding process after the old system kept causing delays. I wrote the whole framework, tested it with 2 teams, and handed it quietly to Marcus before the quarterly meeting. 2 days later, I sat in that meeting and watched Marcus present my framework word for word to the executive team as his own idea. The room applauded. The director called it sharp thinking. Marcus nodded and smiled like he had earned every clap. I stared at the table and said nothing. I told myself recognition didn't matter. I told myself results were enough. I told myself people who did good work always got noticed eventually. I believed every one of those lies. And every one of them cost me something real, time, energy, and years I would never get back from that company. By year 5, I was tired in a way sleep could not fix. I worked through a bad flu in February because a product launch depended on my coordination notes. I missed my mother's birthday dinner in April because a system error needed my attention before the morning shift. I answered emails at midnight, on weekends, on holidays. When exhaustion finally cracked through my surface and I asked Marcus for an assistant, or even just a lighter load for 1 month, he looked at me with something like admiration and said, "Nora, you're handling it so well. I don't think you need the extra help." I walked back to my desk in silence. I sat down and stared at my screen. For the first time in 5 years, I let myself think something I had always pushed away. They were not taking care of me. They were using me and calling it a compliment. In year 6, a new hire named Kevin Farrell joined the team. He was 28, confident, and charming in a way that made people warm to him quickly. I was asked to train him. I spent 4 months teaching Kevin everything: our systems, our client relationships, our internal shortcuts, and all the processes that kept the department running. I was patient and thorough. I genuinely wanted him to do well. Then, 6 months after he arrived, Marcus told me Kevin would be moving into a supervisory role, one level above me. The reason given was that Kevin had strong leadership energy. I was a critical team player whose support had been invaluable. I smiled. I congratulated him. Then I went home and sat in my driveway for a long time. What I didn't yet know was that Kevin, the person I had trained from scratch, would later sign off on cutting my department's resources by 30%. People who knew me outside of work were sometimes surprised I never exploded, but I had clear reasons for staying calm. I was watching. Every time a process broke and I fixed it, I wrote it down. Every time information passed through me from one department to another, I noted it carefully. Over 2 years, I had built a private document on my personal laptop, a detailed map of how Callaway Group actually operated beneath the surface. Every dependency, every hidden failure point, every workflow that only functioned because I personally kept it moving. I didn't build it out of spite. I built it to protect myself, to have proof of my value if I ever needed it. But sitting in my car after the Kevin news, I opened that document and read through it slowly. Those quiet, careful notes had just become something more than self-protection. They had become my exit strategy. The moment that finally broke me was small. That is the strange thing about endings. It is never the biggest blow that finishes you. It was a Tuesday in March. I had stayed 2 hours late the night before to fix a reporting error in a system I didn't even officially manage. The next morning, Kevin sent a team-wide email praising the fast turnaround without mentioning my name. Then I heard him in the hallway telling a colleague that his team was really stepping up. I stood at the printer with warm paper in my hands and felt something shift permanently inside me. Not sadness, not anger, just a quiet, final decision. That evening, I stopped fixing things that weren't directly assigned to me. Within 48 hours, 2 small processes started to wobble. Nobody connected it to me yet, but I noticed. And I went home and began writing my resignation letter. I submitted my resignation on a Thursday morning. I sent the email first, then delivered a printed copy to HR before lunch. The letter was clean and professional. 2 weeks' notice. No threats. No lengthy explanation. No emotional language anywhere in it. I thanked the company and wished everyone well. Brenda replied within the hour, scheduling the exit meeting for the following week in a tone that was completely routine. Nobody from leadership reached out. Marcus sent one line, noted, "Thanks for letting us know." Kevin said nothing at all. The general feeling around the office was that my departure was a mild inconvenience, the kind solved with a quick job posting and a 2-week handover. Nobody was worried. Nobody asked to speak with me. They clearly believed I was either bluffing or easily replaced. Either way, they were not concerned. Not even slightly. And that told me everything I needed to know. The exit meeting with Brenda took place on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days before my last day. I had expected at least one senior leader to attend. Nobody did. It was just Brenda, a yellow notepad, and a printed checklist. She asked routine questions. Had I handed over my files? Was my transition plan in place? Did I have any general feedback? I gave polite, measured answers. When I mentioned that some of my cross-departmental processes might need careful attention during the handover, she nodded and wrote something down. Then she said, "We appreciate the note, but I don't think this will affect operations in any significant way. We have strong people in place." I looked at her and nodded one final time. I did not argue. I did not push harder. I already knew what was coming the moment I walked out that door. I just didn't need them to know that I knew. My last day was a Friday. I arrived at my normal time, cleared my desk slowly, and handed over my access cards and equipment at 3 in the afternoon. I had prepared exactly what was asked: my current task list, login credentials for shared systems, and a brief project summary. Nothing more. I had not volunteered extra context. I had not written the deep explanatory notes I once created for everything. Nobody had asked me to. A few colleagues hugged me and said the usual things about staying in touch. A few others barely looked up from their screens. Kevin stopped by for 30 seconds. Marcus sent an email that arrived while I was packing my bag. I read it, closed my laptop, and walked out through the front doors without turning back. My phone buzzed twice before I reached my car. I let both calls go to voicemail. I never returned them. I heard about the first cracks through Pauline Osei, a colleague who had become a real friend over the years. She texted me 8 days after I left. "Things are a little chaotic," she wrote. "Some handoffs got missed. People don't know who owns what." I wasn't surprised. For years, I had been the unofficial bridge between the operations team and the client services team. When information needed to travel between those two departments, it passed through me. I filtered it, shaped it, and sent it on in a form both sides could actually use. Without me there, both teams were sending requests into silence and getting nothing useful back. Management reportedly called it normal transition noise in a team meeting, telling everyone to be patient. But by the end of week 2, the noise had not settled. It had grown louder, and it was spreading in directions nobody had prepared for. By the start of week 2, the confusion had shifted into something sharper: blame. Pauline sent me a longer message. Departments were pointing fingers at each other in meetings. Client services blamed operations for slow data. Operations blamed client services for unclear requests. And in the middle of all that noise, my name kept appearing. "Why didn't Nora document this?" was said in at least 2 separate meetings. "Has anyone asked how Nora handled this?" came up in a third. Marcus had searched the shared drive for my process notes and found almost nothing, because the rail documentation lived in a private folder I had maintained for my own use and had never been asked to share. I had told Brenda during the exit meeting that certain processes would need close attention. She had written something on her notepad. Clearly, not a single thing had been followed through on. Week 3 was when the first real collapse happened. The client services department missed 3 consecutive deadlines for a major account, a financial firm that had worked with Callaway Group for 6 years. The missed deadlines triggered a formal complaint, then an emergency call with the client's senior leadership. The internal panic was real, according to Pauline. Kevin held a 4-hour meeting that produced nothing useful. Marcus brought in an outside consultant to map the broken workflow. That consultant reportedly spent most of the session asking why a process this critical had absolutely no documentation attached to it. The client didn't leave immediately, but they placed Callaway Group on formal review. One more mistake could end a 6-year contract. It was the kind of crisis that leaves marks for a long time. And while that fire still burned, Pauline sent me a message. 5 words that made my chest tighten, 2 more are going down. On a Thursday morning in week 4, my phone rang with a number I recognized, the main Callaway Group line. I let it ring. An hour later, Brenda sent an email with the subject line checking in. The message was warm and carefully written. She asked how my transition was going and whether I might be open to a short call that week. Almost as an afterthought, she mentioned the company was exploring consulting arrangements with a few former team members. I read it twice. Then I sat back and looked out my window for a long moment. This was the same woman who had told me, without any hesitation, that my resignation wouldn't really matter. Now she was exploring consulting arrangements. I waited 2 full days before replying. When I finally did, I kept my response to one calm, polite sentence. I told her I was open to a conversation. When I got on the call with Brenda, she was noticeably different. Softer, slower, more careful with every word. She said the transition had been more complex than anticipated. She said the team was working through some knowledge gaps. Then she said something I had quietly waited years to hear. "Nora, I don't think we fully understood how much information flowed through you each day." She added they were looking at bringing in 3 people to cover what I had done. 3. I kept my voice steady and professional throughout. But after I hung up, I sat with that number for a while. 3 people. For 8 full years, I had done the work of 3 people on one salary, with no title change, no bonus, and no acknowledgement from anyone above me. It had taken my absence for someone at Callaway Group to finally count what I had actually been worth. The second collapse came at the end of week 4. The operations team lost 2 vendor contracts in the same week after a chain of miscommunications that should have been caught early. Nobody caught them because that habit had lived entirely inside my head. Every Monday morning, I scanned vendor communications, flagged anything risky, and quietly routed it to the right person before it could grow into a real problem. Nobody had been assigned to continue that after I left. Nobody had even known it was happening. The financial damage was serious enough to reach the CEO's desk. My former role was no longer being discussed in HR or by middle management. It had moved to the very top of the company. And on a Tuesday afternoon, I received a message from Marcus Webb, the man who had claimed my work as his own for years. He said he needed to meet. He said he owed me an honest conversation. I met Marcus at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Callaway Group building on a Friday morning. He looked tired. He arrived a few minutes late and opened with small talk, which told me immediately that he was nervous. Then he got to the point. He said the company had seriously underestimated my role. He said the past month had made that undeniably clear. He used the phrase institutional knowledge 3 separate times. He then admitted something I hadn't expected. The client onboarding framework I had built in year 4, the one he had presented to executives as his own idea, was now considered a foundational process inside client services. The outside consultant had flagged it as the most urgent thing needing reconstruction. He paused. He looked down at his cup. Then he said the company wanted me back. He named a salary figure. It was 40% higher than anything I had ever been paid there. I let Marcus finish without interrupting once. When he was done, I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, and set the cup down calmly. Then I told him no. Without anger. Without satisfaction. I told him what respect would have looked like 8 years earlier. A title that matched my real responsibilities, a salary that reflected my actual contribution, and credit for the work I genuinely did. Those things didn't require generosity. They required only basic fairness. And for 8 years, basic fairness had not existed for me at Callaway Group. I told him I had already accepted a position elsewhere, a company where my role was clearly defined from the start, my name was on my own work, and my opinion was asked for before decisions were made, not after everything had broken apart. I watched something shift in his expression as I finished speaking. It looked exactly like panic. The third collapse came during week 5. The finance coordination team, the smallest of the 3 connected departments, had been running on temporary workarounds since the day I left. Those workarounds finally failed completely during a month-end reporting cycle. Numbers didn't reconcile. Reports came in late and wrong. The errors triggered a formal internal audit. 3 team members resigned in the same week, all citing confusion about ownership and a complete lack of direction from leadership. The audit kept tracing every broken process back to the same single point, the removal of a role that had quietly held multiple systems together without anyone ever fully realizing it. No official report named me. But according to Pauline, everyone inside that building knew exactly where the thread had been pulled and what had unraveled the moment it was gone. Leadership was searching hard for someone to blame. It was Pauline who told me about the executive meeting in week 6. She wasn't in the room herself, but a colleague of hers was, and news traveled fast in that building. Apparently Franklin Hurst, the CEO, a man I had met exactly once in 8 years, asked his leadership team a direct question. Had the company built a structural dependency on one person without ever formally recognizing or compensating her for it? The room went silent for a long moment. Then a senior director said my name out loud and confirmed that yes, based on everything the audit and the outside consultant had uncovered, the honest answer was yes. It was the first time in 8 years that my name had been spoken in an executive meeting at Callaway Group. Not to praise me, not to reward me, but at least, in the wreckage of what had collapsed, someone was finally telling the truth. I had started my new role at Meridex Solutions 3 weeks after leaving Callaway Group. My title was Operations Integration Lead. My name appeared on my own project briefs. My manager asked for my input before making decisions that touched my work. My salary reflected what I actually did. So when Pauline's updates kept arriving, I read them from a very different place than I would have just 1 year earlier. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. The particular calm that comes from not dreading Monday mornings anymore. One evening while making dinner and reading Pauline's latest message, I realized I hadn't thought about Callaway Group at all that day until her text arrived on my screen. That was entirely new. That small fact felt like more of a victory than anything else from the past 6 weeks. Then my phone lit up with an email from Brenda. Subject line, one more question. Brenda's email was longer than her previous ones. She said the company had done real reflection in recent weeks. Leadership had a much clearer picture now of the gaps my departure had revealed. Then she reached the real point. This wasn't about salary or a standard return offer. The CEO himself had asked her to reach out about something different. Would I be willing to consult on rebuilding the very systems I had originally created, helping them construct something more durable, something that wouldn't depend on any single person to hold it together? She called it a legacy contribution. Remote work. My own schedule. Full compensation. I read the email 3 times. It was honest and carefully written. In its own way, it was the most genuine communication I had ever received from that company across 8 full years. I sat with it for an entire day before composing my reply. I wanted to choose exactly the right words. I declined. Kindly and firmly. I thanked Brenda and told her I genuinely appreciated that the company had taken real time to reflect on what happened. I meant that. But I told her my energy now belonged to a place that had valued it from the very start, not after a crisis forced the question. I told her I hoped the restructuring went well, and I meant that too. The anger I had carried for years was simply gone. I had set it down during my 3rd week at Meridex, on a Thursday afternoon when my manager said my intake process redesign had saved the team 12 hours a week. He said it plainly, without making it into a big moment. That plain honesty was worth more to me than any figure Callaway Group could have offered. I sent the email. I sat quietly in my kitchen, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. What I know now, looking back clearly, is this: my resignation mattered. It mattered enormously. 3 departments collapsed. A formal audit was launched. A CEO asked hard questions in front of his entire leadership team. An outside consultant was paid real money to rebuild work I had done quietly and for free. 3 people were hired to fill one role that had carried a single salary for 8 years. It all mattered. But the most important truth is simpler than any of that. By the time it happened, I no longer needed it to. I had already rebuilt my mornings. I had reclaimed my evenings. I was somewhere that recognized my value before anything had to break. That was the only victory that actually changed my life. Brenda was right, just not in the way she meant. My resignation didn't matter to them. Right up until the moment, it was the only thing that did. Sometimes the loudest revenge is leaving quietly and letting the truth speak for itself.